Hey there, all you creepers and reapers. Welcome to the Femme Fatalities. I'm your co hostess, Anna, and I'm here with our other co hostess, Margaret.
Hello, all you frightlings and grieflings, and welcome to a delightfully frightening, great story. Today we are going to talk about Friday the 13th, one of the OG slasher films. And yes, an OG killer who kind of flipped it on people because the son gets a lot more credit than his dear old mommy does, and she set the whole thing up.
You're right about that, Margaret. And I think I want to invite our listeners to lounge in the lagoon, eat a little bit of Dracula dim sum, and get ready to as we navigate through this twisted little tale. Before we get into it too much, we have some trigger warnings for you kids. So, there's mother-son relationships, also, of course, horror, blood, death, as well as water. So, it does take place at a campsite with a lake. If you have any sort of hydrophobia, probably not your best genre of films. Margaret, am I forgetting anything?
I think you've got it. We've got teenage sexual activity, a lot of violence. It's a pretty gory film. And yes, if you have a fear of water or if you have any kind of sensitivity, because this movie does touch on intellectual disabilities, if not physical disabilities, there's really, I mean, at the end, we get an idea that Jason was not only intellectually disabled, also most likely physically disabled, handicapped, deformed. And so if you have a sensitivity to that, please be wary, because I don't know about you, Anna, but it doesn't feel like it really, this movie has an ableist sort of feel
Mhm.
to it and doesn't really have any kind of compassion or empathy for people with disabilities, other than it sort of feeds the backstory. So
Mhm.
I'd say Friday the 13th 2
Yeah.
taps into more of that empathy and compassion for who
Mhm.
Jason was and what he
Mhm.
went through.
Yeah, and especially, I mean, at the and towards the end when Pam kind of just alludes to, well, Jason was different.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of it is of the time. I mean, this was what, late 70s, early 80s. We're coming right off of Geraldo Rivera's expose on state institutions and the treatment of persons that were experiencing intellectual disabilities, developmental disabilities, all of these sorts of physical and mental and intellectual conditions that they had nothing to do with other than being born and existing in this world.
Yeah.
So there was really, I would venture to argue, a lack of sensitivity during the time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I would also argue there's still a lot of insensitivity in the intellectual and developmental disability world.
Yes, I would totally agree. If anybody's listening, if you are so adventurous to watch Cry Little Children, it was about Penhurst. Oh my gosh, heartbreaking, devastating,
Mhm.
really brings light. I believe it was before Geraldo. I could be
Mhm.
wrong, around the same time. And still, like Anna's saying, our country does a disservice to those with intellectual and physical disabilities. And if you ever have the chance, I used to work, I used to be a program manager with adults with developmental disabilities. Some of the most beautiful, wonderful, just fabulous people that I was blessed, that I was
Mhm.
privileged to be able to work with. If you volunteer, you will see, you will start to become aware of in your daily life. Even I challenge you, next time you go to a building, is it really handicap accessible? If you know somebody with a wheelchair, Could they access the bathroom, the building? What about a walker? So often we take these things for granted. Sidewalks. Next time if you have dogs, walk your dogs. I am so well aware of sidewalk obstacles when people block it, because people with a wheelchair, if you block the little sidewalk, the person with the wheelchair now has to go into the street. So just these ways to be mindful that we
Mm-hmm.
could say Friday the 13th planted a little seed
Yeah.
of the plight and being a parent as we explore Pamela and
Mm-hmm.
what it must have been like. As Anna has touched on, this was a time we were coming out of institutionalizing people that were born with any kind of handicap, disability. Basically, if you had a child that was disabled, handicapped, you were told you might as well institutionalize them. I worked with some of those individuals. They're never going to walk, they're never going to talk. They walked, they talked, and they had beautiful personalities.
Mm-hmm.
And so this movie is showing, would you agree, Anna, that mother's grief of having a child that, as Pamela says, is different?
I totally agree. And I think part of it too is the lack of support, the
Mhm.
lack of resources at that time. Remember, we're talking about a very different time than what we're living in today. Um, just so many different things. And I think that what we found out regarding the horror trope of Pam Voorhees, which I'm going to get to in a minute, the PTSD associated with that, compounded with her mental illness, as well as having a child that she may or may not have fully been able to care for herself, and not having support in caring for that child, really affected her, as we see in the movie. When we get to the trope, yes, Pam Voorhees did have a spouse. His name evidently was Elias, and from what I understand in the comic book, I've not fully read it. However, I did find some information. He was very abusive to her, and sometime throughout the course of her pregnancy with Jason, the abuse continues. Pam starts to hear Jason speaking to her from the womb, encouraging her to kill her husband. So she does. She torches the trailer, and they actually move to Crystal Lake. Crystal Lake is a place. It's not just the camp name, which I learned. I always just thought it was the name of the camp. And then Pam eventually gets a job working for a family that lives in Crystal Lake, and eventually she transcends to working as a cook at the camp. And that's how Jason is able to attend the camp. So we're looking at a woman who has experienced a tremendous amount of physical and psychological abuse, and has retaliated uh, in the form of murder. So the kids at camp were not her first dabbling in homicide at all. So it's very much a mother will try to protect their child at all costs, which I think shows in that she murdered her husband. And I think part
Yes.
of the reason that she's seeking revenge on the counselors, and this is something that happens repeatedly throughout the history of the film, I think that she is seeking revenge in part because of the traumatic grief, as well as the guilt she feels for not being available when he was in the water. If I would have been there, he wouldn't have drowned.
Yes, that guilt that we often experience when somebody does die in a traumatic way, that, like Anna was saying, if I had been there, this wouldn't have happened. And then she wants to punish the people that she feels are responsible. We're going to get into that a little bit more. I just want to go back a little. So Anna shared that backstory. I actually found a little bit different of a backstory. They redid
Oh.
Friday the 13th in the 2000s, and they were going to have a part two. And in part two, the director was actually going to have a flashback scene to Pamela and Elias having a fight where Elias is like, we need to institutionalize him. He can't stay here. This isn't okay. And so then Pamela kills him because she doesn't want to have her son institutionalized. So either backstory we go with for Pamela, There's the threat of losing her child, already the trauma associated with having a child born with disabilities, the lack of supports, the lack of understanding, empathy, a time where this was shunned. A lot of parents were perceived as you did something wrong. So she's already carrying this guilt that I
Mhm.
did something wrong. Or if she was physically abused while she was pregnant, then maybe if since I stayed with him, this man has harmed my child and I have harmed my child. So that internalized anger that she's experiencing while trying to take care of her
Mhm.
son. And then we get into she's going to punish the people. She couldn't protect him. She trusted teenagers to protect him. And they were too busy being teenagers. Oh,
Mhm.
so and so's cute. Let's go make out. And then we are led to believe in the movie that he drowned, then learning that he didn't drown and
Mhm.
what impact that had, right? We can guess that he didn't have oxygen for a while, so he already is compromised in a lot of ways. How now is he that much more
Mhm.
limited because of somebody else's negligence?
Right. Yeah. And then it also kind of makes me wonder, the first movie was Jason Pam's accomplice in some of the murders this whole time. And there are a lot more questions than answers. And I can remember being a little kid and seeing it with my parents. And at the end, the final scare before the real ending, I just felt so sad for Jason. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like, poor Jason. What a sad life he's had.
Yes, he had a tragic life. His mom is the cook or KitchenAid or whatever. We know she works in the kitchen.
Hmm.
He's already different, so he probably is not included with the other kids. And then he's left to drown. Like you really have a lot of empathy for
Yeah.
Jason and Pamela. They both have had very tragic lives, and I love that point, Anna. Was he an accomplice in the beginning? Because we know, as we talk about mother-son relationships,
Hmm.
he really adored his mom. So we could guess that Pamela was a very doting, a very empathetic, compassionate mother because they had a very strong bond. We could argue
Yeah.
maybe that she
Hmm.
was a little too loving.
Yeah.
I don't know because he had so much going on that felt like she
Hmm.
really did her best to take care of him.
Yeah. And it may have been too that if I don't give my child all the love in the world, who else will? And it's very disheartening to think about at that time, um, just someone being so marginalized, but it really did, it happened. It's part of history, and it's part of the society we live in and how people were treated. And it's something that many people are still trying to navigate through. And honestly, if you are listening to this, if you or someone you know has a child, a parent, a sibling, someone in your life that does need additional support, maybe they do have a disability, there are so many amazing organizations out there now that not only support the person, but also family and friends through their journeys in life as well. And if you have lost someone that you grieved individually for because you felt so disenfranchised and so marginalized in your grief experience, there are other people that have gone through this sort of grief as well who have found supports. You can still find supports. You can still find help if you want to. There are so many different programs and groups for those related to someone who lost another person with a disability, or if you are someone who identifies as having a disability, and you have lost your primary carer, or you've lost a parent, or someone that was very, very pivotal to your life and important to your life, there are additional supports out there for you as well. And it's very important that you know that.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. Look for your supports. There are supports out there for you. And I think Anna also touched on caregiver grief, as well as the person with the disabilities and the caregiver grieving all these non finite losses, right? So if I have a physical handicap, I have all these griefs related to that as this condition either improves or worsens. And caregivers experience that grief along with the person they are taking care of. So, oftentimes, when we do have physical limitations, there are other things that come with that, other health concerns that aren't always addressed, and people don't always make space. Oh, well, you just have this. Well, yeah, I have this, and then these other things always, not always, but happen to it. If I have asthma, then how is that progressing, and how am I losing? What am I losing in life? And then how is my caregiver's life impacted as they have to take care of my breathing and all of that? You think of people, especially as they get older, that develop COPD, and then
Mhm.
all the ways that that impacts life. We often just say, okay, Pam had this disabled son, and that's so sad. What they had to most likely go through as she's trying to navigate him, and how he's changing, and how she has to then grieve. Anna, I know, speaks beautifully about caregiver grief and that response to, as the caregiver, all the ways their life has to change as they have to continue to care for their loved one whose life and circumstances is continuing to change.
Right. Totally. And I think too, something, you know, obviously this is like a revenge story, and
Mhm.
it's a great twist ending if you've never seen it, or if you can remember seeing it the first time. But also, when you're a caregiver for someone, you feel like you have very few people in your life that you can trust around this person. And I really think that that betrayal of the trust, those camp counselors, these kids, Pam Voorhees trusted these kids to take care of her
Mhm.
child. And they were busy doing what they wanted to do. And, ultimately, Jason suffers the consequences. And that really is kind of what starts Pam's spree. And I think that that's something really to keep in mind as well. A lot of the time, when you're going through change or loss or a grief journey, you have people in your life that you trust with your deepest, most inner feelings, and even just the smaller things like your daily routine for things to be taken care of. How often have we been going through our journey and something as small as an unwashed coffee cup just completely sets us off? And honestly, if you're experiencing that right now, that is normal grief behavior. You are grieving. That's normal. There's nothing abnormal about it, but it can be very difficult when the characters that we see as trustworthy to what we hold important about ourselves and those closest to us do something that feels like a betrayal, whether, it is an outright lack of emotional support, or not taking proper action, breaking a promise, not continuing with an agreed upon routine. Those things all can have very far reaching consequences in reality.
Yes, definitely. As you're saying, like, this is a revenge story. And so here is Pamela trying to manage working, taking care of her sick son, and she's trusting these people with her son's livelihood, and they betray that. And how she's trying to manage just life, like Anna was saying, like all these different griefs we experience as she's trying to maintain life, and how people let her down, and ultimately Jason down.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that the interesting thing is too, I mean, we're not going to get too much into the sequel and additional movies, but when we do get into Friday the 13th Part 2, her reactivity and her behavior have modeled how Jason behaves.
Yes.
I mean, she
He's
has
just
created,
reacting.
yeah, I mean, she's created this, and she's no longer around to change it. So he's
Mhm.
just doing what he knows and thinks is best.
Yes, definitely. And think about his trauma. He drowns and then he watches his mom beheaded.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know intellectually what level he's functioning at, which also is vital in grief. Is he like pre 5 years old? So he does not understand that death is irreversible.
Mm-hmm.
It's done. It happens. Or is he grade school aged mentally? So he, right, very black and white thinking at grade school. And oftentimes then it's that thinking that death can still be reversed, or that somebody else, like death is a person. And so it's almost like then Jason we could argue that he becomes the personification of death
Mm-hmm.
if he is operating at a grade school level. Or if, I don't know about you, Anna, he doesn't feel like a teenager mentally. He feels to me more like a grade school kid. They show him as a grade school kid when he
Mm-hmm.
comes out of the water at her. He feels like he has that level of thinking. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I do think even he may be a little bit older in terms of his functionability because, we notice once again in the second film that he has kept his mother's head and her
Mhm.
clothing and has a vigil. So one could question, is this a ritual and tradition according to their culture or their religion? Or is this his way of coping or a combination of the two? Um, so it really does leave a lot up to the imagination.
Yes, it does. That's, yeah, great, great point there. We don't know and how he is engaging with the grief of his mom and his vengeance too.
Totally. And I think that for me it's kind of the innocence of adolescent thought as well. The final girl in the original Friday the 13th, she's in the hospital, and one of the first things she asks is, "Where's the little boy? Did you
Hmm.
find the little boy?" So it's like, okay, like his mom just tried to kill you, but you're still concerned for him.
Yes. And where was that empathy
Mhm.
when he was drowning? Where was that empathy that Pamela probably needed? She needed that final girl's empathy in the beginning, somebody that really was invested, really concerned about the little boy.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's just kind of like, wow. And then, of course, in the beginning of the second one, he kills her. And I'm like, oh, but she was concerned for you. Um, oh, well.
Yes.
And of course, one thing I do have to mention, which is not really relative to the thanatological science, however, I think it's very relative to this film. Uh, Kevin Bacon kill scene, one of my favorites. I just thought I'd mention that. That's all.
Yes. Oh, you get to mention that. It's a great kill scene.
Yeah, I mean, just it's great that like actors who got their start in this sort of genre, and many of them have fantastic kill scenes. So,
Hmm.
yeah, that's wonderful.
Yes. Yes. Ooh, so anything else to add about Jason and Pamela before we get into our usual question of the episode?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think we've kind of covered it. Just, to reiterate, out there, if you are looking for supports, kind of anywhere in the disability world, there are a lot of really great local, regional, and national nonprofit agencies that are out there to really benefit your life as well as the lives of those closest to you, and provide so many different supports to you. Um, Definitely, comment. We can certainly help you find some organizations if that is an area of interest. And also just remember that you're not alone out there. Um, People do care about you, people want to help you and encourage you, and want to be there for you.
Mhm. Yes, there are supports. Reach out for those supports. You are not alone, especially now in the digital era. You can get online, you can Google, there are Facebook groups. There are so many different groups where there are parents, people, family, friends that can support you so that you're not alone and will have ideas and suggestions and resources as well. So, Anna, who do you most relate to in this movie?
Gosh, that's a tough one.
Hmm.
I might have to think about that for a minute. Um, I want to say like the crazy guy on the bike, but he doesn't. He does. I don't think he makes an appearance in the first one. I think he's later on. Um,
Isn't he though? Isn't he like in the beginning when the
I
girl she's
Oh, yeah, I think he might be.
yeah.
So I'm gonna go with the local yokel on the bicycle.
Hmm.
I'm trying my best to warn those kids not to go up there. And I think just because I am a little eccentric myself, and I try to encourage people to heed my advice, and it doesn't always go as planned. Um, but I do enjoy, up until his demise a few movies in, that the local dude is trying to be respectful of the Vorhees as well as just to tell people like you really don't want to go up there. So he's just trying to help everybody. How about you?
Yes. Oh, I completely agree. While part of me can relate to Pamela's motherly instinct to protect her child and want to make sure her child's okay, she goes way to the extreme that I don't relate to. So like I'm that local guy. I'm like, hey, like what are you doing? Like don't mess around where you don't need to be messing around. Like don't go
Hmm.
up there. Like don't be stupid. Like I know a thing or two and they're like, whatever. And
Yeah.
yes, I agree. The local old guy, crazy old
Yeah.
guy on a bike.
Pretty
And that they
much.
just think he's a crazy old guy, right? They're not like, oh, maybe this guy has something value to say. They judge him based on how he
Yeah.
talks, how he dresses, what he does when he really is a wise person.
And once again, that speaks so loudly to that adolescent mindset of I'm invincible. I don't have to do what anyone tells me. Free spirited and fanciful, and all of those kind of negative traits that we associate with the teenage archetype, and were
Mhm.
shown not only in horror movies but really throughout the genre of media. Um, which is not always accurate. I mean, adolescents have a lot of really great things about them as well, and you can't lump everyone into the same group, of course. But it really does kind of drive the point home that they're selfish. All they care about is a good time. And, it makes more for the film itself because you kind of fall into those kids are a bunch of jerks type of mindset as the
Mhm.
movie goes on.
Yes. Yes.
Well,
All right. Well, thanks for joining us with our little brief Friday the 13th. And ooh,
Yes, and thank you so much for checking this out. We really do appreciate you listening. We're going to have some lengthier episodes coming up as well, talking about some more familial type of relations and other items of that nature, and just relationships in general. And then we're going to be twisting it to something completely different. So stay tuned. Make
Yeah.
sure that you put your little witch hats back on before you go out in the cold. And if you're going to fly through the night, make sure you bundle up. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. See you next time. Bye.